So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the European Parliament Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development, I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's webinar, where we'll be addressing EPR as an instrument to tackle microplastics pollution. This event is structured in the form of two webinars. So the first webinar to be held today is aimed towards problem setting, understanding of microplastics and potential measures to address it specifically. The second webinar, to be held on the 24th of February, will be focused on EPR as a policy instrument. So before we kick off, I would like to take the opportunity to thank hosting MEP Mr. Franc Bogovič for hosting today's event, as well as the second event to follow on the 24th of February, if that can serve as a teaser, as well as colleagues from the EPR Club for kindly co-organizing today's event. Prior to passing the floor, I would also like to provide you with some housekeeping rules. So I would like to, at this stage, invite our audience to send us your questions during the event. To do that, you can use the Q&As box at the right of your screen, choosing the All Panelists option. Within your question, also, please make sure to indicate the speaker to whom your question is best addressed, so that on behalf of the Secretariat of the Intergroup, we can facilitate a fruitful discussion to follow. Having said that, I would like to let you know that the Q&A session and the overall event moderation will be held by Ms. Françoise Bonnet on behalf of ACR+, so the Secretary General of the Association of Cities and Regions for Sustainable Resource Management. So thank you very much, Françoise, for that. Once again, thank you very much for joining us today. With no further ado, Mr. Bogovič, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon to everybody. Thanks to all panelists, thanks to all participants to join to this very important webinar about microplastic. I'm honored that I can be host of such an important event. Plastics are a modern marvel. They have been benefited society across all sectors, including in the health and food sector, and also saving countless lives. Since the industrial production of plastic began in 1950s, the volume of plastics produced and have outpaced those of almost any other materials. However, the same characteristics that make plastic highly desirable are also those that are the most damaging of the environment, especially as a large fraction of plastic is designed to be discarded almost immediately following their use. Only 9% of all plastic ever manufactured has been recycled. Most of the plastic waste ends up in landfill and ultimately in the environment. Most plastics are not degradable. Instead, they slowly fragment into smaller particles referred to as microplastic and probably nanoplastics. These particles, whether in the form of larger or smaller plastic, have profound detrimental consequences for ecosystem, biota, and the environment, but also for the economy and human health. Plastics have been found in the stomach content of numerous organisms, including earthworms, birds, turtles, dolphins, and whales. Smaller particles may be even more preservative, and this may be ingested by organisms that are at the basis of different food webs. Smaller plastic particles can absorb and other contaminants and act to their sink or sources of contamination in organisms. In addition, chemicals used to improve the characteristic of plastics, known as plasticiers, can leach into the environment and constitute new routes to exposure to organisms. The economic impacts of plastic waste is huge. Studies suggest an economic damage to the global marine ecosystem in over surprising 11 billion euro globally. In Europe, 630 million euro are spent every year to clean plastic waste from coast and beaches. The environment, health, and economic reasons to act are clear. Consequently, there is a growing international determination to consider and evaluate the use of plastic at all stages of their life cycle. This is not only includes design and manufacture, but also use, reuse, and the end-of-life management, with a special focus on the inputs and the removal of plastic from the environment. The European Parliament has raised the issue of microplastic in several documents. In our response to the Commission's EU plastic strategy in 2018, we advocated for a ban on microplastic in cosmetic, personal care products, detergents, and cleaning products by 2020, which to my understanding has not been implemented yet. Among other things, the European Parliament also called on the Commission to set minimum requirements in product legislation to significantly reduce the release of microplastic at sources, in particular for textile, tires, paints, and cigarette butts. Several of our proposals have been later upgraded in the directive on the reduction of the impact of certain plastic products on the environment, which established new rules on single-use plastic with the aim to reduce marine litters, and was adopted in June 2019. A variety of regulatory and legislative tools exist aimed at controlling, reducing, and managing the use of plastic, especially on single-use plastics. Existing legislation constantly mainly of levies, bans, and voluntary efforts through the rule reduce, reuse, and recycle. However, these regulatory instruments have had a limited impact in volume, scope, or both, especially when considering the exponential yearly increase in production and use of plastic, including the growing synthesis of new materials with new applications. Improvements on plastic legislation are therefore needed to be able to better consider and address environmental and human health impacts. Importantly, most of existing tools are designed to address plastic waste at the end of its life cycle, following its manufacture. Upstream legislation approach are needed to stimulate a zero waste target, which will undoubtedly improve the feasibility and efficacy of future plastic policies. Ideally, production, use, and disposal of plastic must be dealt with at all global level, as existing supply chain cross and across borders, continents, and oceans. Stick and carrot legislative approach are needed, aimed at rewarding those consumers, producers, and suppliers working towards a zero waste strategy, while highly punitive action should be developed for offenders. Thanks, and I really am excited for debate that we will all know more about microplastic and necessity to implement a new regulation. Thanks, and Françoise, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bogovič, for your introduction words. Before giving the floor to the next speaker, I would like to say good afternoon to everybody, and maybe to give you 2 words about the EPR Club that was created in 2012 on the initiative of several ACR Plus members, and supported at that time by the Commissioner, Mr. Potočnik. And the aim was really to exchange views and knowledge about this crucial policy instrument towards circular economy. It's a unique think tank on EPR as a policy principle, and I hope that those 2 events will give us inspiration to tackle the microplastic issue. So our next speaker is Mrs. Rosalina Petrova. Rosalina Petrova is a member of the Cabinet of Commissioner on Environment, Ocean and Fisheries at the European Commission. She joined the Directorate General for Environment in 2010 to develop the EU policy to use resources more efficiently and integrate environmental considerations in economic governance. Mrs. Petrova, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and I would also like to thank you for organizing this discussion and for having the Commission and me to present you our views and plans. First of all, indeed, Mr. Bogovič already did a very good overview of what we have been indeed doing in the past few years in the area of plastics. And indeed, as you said, the challenges there, plastic indeed brings numerous benefits to society, but at the same time, the pollution problem and the pollution challenge is source of major public concern. And since the consumption of plastics is expected actually to double in the coming 20 years, the Commission is determined to take further targeted measures to address the sustainability challenges of plastics. And also, we will continue to promote a concerted approach to tackle plastic pollution at global level, because we know that even if we in Europe stop leaking plastics as of tomorrow, the problem would not be solved since our water sources are interconnected, and we have to act both in the EU, giving the example, leading the green transition as we do in many other areas, and also act at the global level. I think that if we look at the past, not so far. Indeed, we have both taken comprehensive measures on plastics to stop the leaking of microplastics, which then of macroplastics, sorry, so for the big plastic items, which then disintegrate into microplastics. And we have indeed adopted new ambitious waste legislation in 2018. The deadline to transpose it by member states was last year. So as many things, it would take time for those measures to have effect, of course. And we are looking forward to the mobilization of the separate collection systems and of improving proper waste management so that we can deal with this challenge, since indeed a great part of the plastic that ends up into our environment comes from improper waste management. And another very important measure, of course, in this regard is the Single-Use Plastic Directive, and this directive is expected to, so it has to be transposed this year, so we will again see the effects in the coming years. And next to that, another very important development is the adoption of the own resource for the EU budget, which is based on plastic packaging waste, which is not recycled, which again will give an additional impetus to member states to take measures to fight plastic pollution. So these are some key initiatives there. And we also used the new waste legislation to sharpen the tool. That is also one of the main themes of today's webinar. This is the extended producer responsibility requirements. So now we have in European legislation minimum requirements for extended producer responsibility schemes, which actually ensure that those schemes will be an effective instrument in ensuring proper management of waste, and also also will stimulate actually producers to produce more sustainable, to design more sustainable products. And indeed, the contribution, the discussions have started a long time ago, indeed with Commissioner Potočnik already, and I think that they have been very useful in order to make sure that we both get ambitious targets, but we also indeed, as I said, sharpen our instruments to achieve those targets. So, and I think that the discussion, the topic of today's webinar is very interesting, because what we would like to explore is how we can indeed broaden the use of the EPR, and where does it make indeed sense to do so, and what aspects of microplastic pollutions can we address. As I said, it's very important. First of all, the new waste legislation tries to ensure that there is proper waste management, that waste is collected, separately collected, so that those macroplastics don't leak in the environment. With the single-use plastic directive, we went one step further, and we now have also extended producer responsibility for littering and awareness raising. So this is expanding, and indeed, here it will be useful to hear the views from various angles on indeed what are those best policy instruments to address microplastics. Microplastics as a topic, of course, is something that is a priority for this commission. It was prioritized both by our president when she took up office, and then it's part of the European Green Deal, and main part on microplastics in the new Circular Economy Action Plan that was adopted last year. Actually, we have committed in the new Circular Economy Action Plan first to indeed take the appropriate measures to restrict intentionally added microplastics, and here is where we have indeed the rich restriction dossier. We are expecting to get it this year, and possible restrictions on this basis we have to proceed on the Commission side as well, and we can indeed expect developments on that still this year. Then we have also committed to tackling pellets. This is actually then the production. This is about the production of plastics and making sure that there is stricter pollution control from this. Actually, a lot of pellets end in the environment, and there are good practices on how this could be prevented. Then we have also committed to consider labeling, standardization, certification, and regulatory measures on unintentional release of microplastics. So the REACH dossier will cover intentionally added microplastics, but we also want to address those plastics that are unintentionally released, and here we are talking about main sources of microplastics, such as textiles. When they're washed, they leach some materials leach quite some microplastics. The same holds for when we drive our cars. The tires release quite some microplastics. So these are two major sources that we would particularly look into, and I will be happy to hear also on those two topics today as well. And we would, of course, like to close the gaps on scientific knowledge related to the risk and occurrence of microplastics in the environment. Of course, we have also planned major initiatives in the area of wastewater too, and of course, we still have to consider what will be the options that will be part of the impact assessment, and how we can use EPR for different pollutants. And since EPR is an instrument to apply better the polluter pays principles. And but we have started looking into that. But that regards microplastics in the context of wastewater, as far as I understand, there are certain, let's say, technologically we are not there yet to ensure that we can actually remove them, not from the wastewater itself, but from the sludge in particular, because as I understand, currently they are removed from the wastewater with quite some big success, although some installations are better than other, and this is where we could definitely indeed have some improvements, but indeed then they end up in the sludge, and this is where, of course, if sludge is used in agriculture, then those microplastics can be returned in the environment, and then this is a challenge, one of the challenges that we have also to look into that. So perhaps I would stop here and leave a bit more of a detail for the discussion. But once again, thank you very much for organizing this, for keeping the discussion on EPR, on extended producer responsibility, and the forward-looking discussion also on microplastics. And I'm looking forward to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Petrova. And now we have our keynote speakers who will hopefully give us more basic information about what is microplastic and the issue of microplastic. So we have the pleasure to have with us Jürgen Bertling, who is a business development, environment and deputy head of Department of Sustainability and Participation for the Fraunhofer Institute for Environmental Safety and Energy Technology, UMSI. Mr. Bertling has experience in leading numerous research projects on innovation systems and sustainability strategies, as well as new material-related processing and manufacturing techniques. Mr. Bertling, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for your kind introduction. Dear ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank EPR Club and the Intergroup for the invitation to share some of our ideas and insights about microplastics. Within my short presentation, I would like to show that plastic emissions, and especially microplastics, are a European challenge and not something that is only happening in rivers in Far East. But let me give you only a few informations about the institute I'm working with. Fraunhofer Umsicht is located in Oberhausen in the Ruhr area in Germany. We have around 450 employees and our R&D budget is around 42 million euros per year. Our research covers topics like energy and process technology, product and material development, and aspects of sustainable development, including assessment methods and participation strategies. In the next few minutes, I will present a few figures and numbers from our studies on the situation of plastic emission in Germany from 2018, some data from external sources, and some newer information from studies which will be published by us in the near future. It is important to understand that there are a lot of very different sources of plastic emissions. Pellet losses, tire wear, and the infill of artificial turf are very well known. In addition, there are emissions like weathering of facade colors or fragmentation and vandalism of agricultural films. Some not so well-known sources include seeds with a polymer coating, the use of a lawn trimmer with a nylon thread which is abraded during use, and the taking of pharmaceutical drugs in a polymer capsule. And even if we think we are doing good by sweeping up plastic emissions, we should bear in mind that the bristles of the brush are made of plastic and they are subject to heavy abrasion while cleaning. We have to consider that only a few of these sources for plastic emissions are addressed by the ECHA restriction proposal. The first discoveries of microplastic in the oceans date back to the early 70s. Despite this long history, the term microplastic was first used by Thomson in 2004, and first time it was defined has been on an NOAA conference in 2008. Since then, the upper limit of 5 millimeters is widely accepted. In the first decades, the lower limit was mostly given by practical consideration, especially by the mesh size of the nets and which are used to collect microplastics. Nowadays, when it comes to environmental regulation, the lower limit is subject to intense discussions between the stakeholders. While some want to exclude nanoscale polymer dispersions, others want to include even water-soluble polymers. At the end, we believe there's no good reason for any size limit because they are not derived based on environmental or toxicological deliberation or even better experimental results. Any limit could lead to gaps and disproportionalities in regulation or lead to unwanted evasions. Instead of size limits, we think biodegradability should be the most important benchmark for the assessment of every plastic emissions, independent from size, because it determines how big the problem will grow by accumulation of plastics in the environment during the next decades. Nevertheless, our knowledge up to now is very weak regarding biodegradation, especially under varying environmental conditions. Spreading of data is very high. Especially for polymers showing slow degradation, we need much more information to assess the amount and impacts in nature on an intergenerational timescale. Nevertheless, we propose to divide the polymer applications into 3 classes. The first, marked with a green arrow, should consist of environmentally open applications, for example, uses in agriculture, cosmetics. Polymers for this application should be highly biodegradable. The second class, with a red arrow, should cover all applications where we are really able to close the leakage to the environment. For this application, we think it's okay when the polymers are not biodegradable. The last, with a yellow arrow, group covers applications where polymers undergo wear and fragmentation during use. These polymers should exhibit something we would like to call emergency biodegradation. This means a degradation which is fast enough that an unlimited accumulation in nature is avoided and an acceptable level is given to future generations. What's about the quantities of microplastic we face today? Until now, there are only a few studies with rough estimates on plastic emissions available, including our own for Germany, we prepared in 2018. The most detailed studies have been prepared for Scandinavian countries. When we compare these studies, it is important to consider what is reported. Losses which originate directly from the application of plastics or final releases to the environment. As a rough number, we should keep in mind that in European countries, the losses reach about 1 kilogram per person for macroplastic and 3 kilogram per person and year for microplastics. This means the plastic litter we see around us when we are walking through the streets, train stations and parks is only the tip of an iceberg. When it comes to global emissions, most studies estimate a very different ratio. Here, macroplastic is the dominating source. One conclusion could be that the level of microplastic emission is somewhat connected with the consumption level we have in our countries. If we have a deeper look into the origin of the emissions, we see that most of them, about 66%, are caused by weathering and abrasion in the use phase. Only about 8% are intentionally added and released and therefore covered by the EPR restriction proposal. Furthermore, the emitted materials are not only thermoplastics and thermosets. Rubber, which is used in a lot of applications where wear and tear is typical, plays also a crucial role. What is not well understood until today is the transfer of microplastic from the technosphere to the environment. Transfer rates reported in scientific literature vary from 2 to 48%, depending on emission types and relevant pathways. When microplastic is transported by wastewater, it is likely that most of it is recovered in wastewater treatment plants. Nevertheless, depending on the type of sludge utilization, a huge part may be transferred to agricultural soil. When microplastic is not entering the wastewater streams, it may remain directly on the soils, but it is likely that large parts are transported by stormwaters. What is happening then is strongly dependent on the local type of the sewer system. If there is a combined sewer, the microplastic will end up in the wastewater treatment plant again. If there is a separated sewer system, they are directly transferred to the rivers and oceans. The importance of transfer to agricultural soils is not enough in the focus until now. This is supported by a study we are currently working on. In agriculture, we see a lot of sources for microplastic emissions, from coated seeds and fertilizers over fragmentation of films, nets, and yarns, to the loss of clips and binders, which are heavily used in agriculture. All sources are summing up to an overall emission of about 1.1 kilogram per hectare and year. Nevertheless, most important sources of microplastic emissions to soil seem to be the impurities in sludge, compost, and digestives. One of the hottest topics in the microplastic discussions, especially in summer 2019, was the release of infill from artificial turf pitches. The estimated rates of emission in different studies were heavily criticized by some companies. Motivated by this, we have done a lot of work on this topic during the last months. We experimentally investigated 12 pitches in Germany and Switzerland and measured the losses. We saw that they vary in a wide range with an average value of 2.5 to 3 tons per pitch and year. We saw higher losses in Switzerland compared to Germany, perhaps because of intense snow removal. Nevertheless, unfortunately, we didn't see any strong indications of improvement for younger pitches compared to older ones, which is shown in this figure. For sure, the biggest source, we already heard about this, of microplastic emissions is tire wear. In a project some of my colleagues just have finished, it was shown that an inner city tempo limit could cut the emissions into half. But speed limits are not the only thing one could do. When we have a look at the relation of braking distance on the y-axis here to mileage, what is defined by the profile were from 8 to 1.6 millimeters, we see that there is no strong correlation between these two physical quantities, or the data are spreading very much. On the other hand, this indicates that there is much room for improvement without decreasing performance. So innovation could help to reduce microplastic emissions, even if the source under consideration exists for more than 100 years, like tires do. On my final slide, I would like to connect plastic emissions with the idea of circular economy. The emissions we face today are about 1/4 of the recycled amount. This is not a satisfying proportion for a circular economy. If we really would manage it to close the loop by recycling in the near future, with such high emission rates, our feedstock would run empty very fast. After 25 years, it would have cut into half. So for an efficient circular economy, closing the leakage should be as important as increasing the recycling rates. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this very interesting introduction about the topic, and I'm sure that it will raise a lot of questions and other. Now we have the pleasure to have Fazilet Sinahalp as the next speaker. She is the Secretary General at the European Tire and Rubber Manufacturer Association. So, as we saw, tires are, let's say, a big consumer of these emissions, or at least producer better than consumer. And Mrs. Sineralp has been leading this association, so EPRMA, since 2006, and has developed a high expertise in environmental and sustainability issues relating to the tire and rubber industries. Mrs. Sineralp, the floor is yours. You are muted, please unmute.
All right, sorry. So thank you very much, Mrs. Bonnet, for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you to EPR Club as well as the intergroup for this invitation. It's true that the tire has been put on the on quite some highlights. We do recognize, of course, that tire and road wear particles are associated to the microplastics debate, and definitely we are keen to be able to contribute and work all together on this important topic. So indeed, I would like to go through maybe some basics in this regard and also explain what we are all doing in this regard. So the tire and road wear particles, we need to make sure that also the terminology is right. These are debris, tiny debris, which are formed because the rubber hits the road. It has a function, but the new particle that comes out from this friction between the tire and the road is indeed totally new agglomeration of a new mix, which is composed of rubber coming from the tire tread, but also from the road pavement materials. This issue of the tire and road wear particles actually poses a number of important sustainability challenges for all of us. I would like to maybe quote three. One, tires are designed to grip. The friction between the tire and the road is necessary to ensure grip and therefore road safety, but this is also the reason why these particles are generated. Second is the same grip, the same performance also play an essential role in sustainable mobility, because the friction between tire and road is also not only essential for road safety, as we have seen, and we test every day, but it's also essential for bringing the environmental benefits in terms of fuel efficiency, but also in terms of reducing rolling noise. So the challenge, as I said, is quite complex. We have even a third one, which is even more complex. The phenomenon is quite really is complex because it is bringing together factors which are not all under one actor's control. It involves our driving behavior, it involves the vehicle's characteristics, it's dependent on the weather conditions, and all these elements have a significant role. And mainly, and we never talk enough about that, are the road pavements. So the type of roads, the way how the grip of the roads have been designed have a direct influence on the abrasion rate of the tire and road wear particles. Therefore, a mobilization of all the actors and stakeholders in order to deploy the most holistic approach is definitely needed. I think we all recognize that the quantities may be important, but at the same time, there is also a broad recognition now and acknowledgement that significant knowledge gaps still exist on and around the topic of tire and road wear particles. There are still many uncertainties about their identification, about their distribution, about their impact, about their contribution to the microplastic pollution in the environment. This is including also our oceans. So indeed, there is still a lot of uncertainties The only thing we know is that it is released unintentionally because of the use of normal driving on the roads. But beyond that, I think everything else, a lot still has to be looked at. And what we have seen is that indeed in the last probably 18 months or 2 years, there have been a lot of evidence that have been published, lots of studies. Every month we new studies, new evidence coming on to our knowledges. But industry has been working on this topic as well for many years. The first, I think, that have started is under the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. There is a tire industry project, which actually already from 2005 initiated some multiple research in order to look around the particles which are generated, how they are formed, how these particles have been, what's the size of these particles. So these particles have been characterized in the meantime. It's between 80 to 100 microns. The potential impact, environmental and human health impact, have been assessed, and it continues to be assessed. So there is indeed, at least there, around 15 years of research. The result of this research is available on under the link, and these slides will be made available to the audience, so you can continue. So far, the research of the tire industry project has, in fact, found that the presence of these particles presents no significant risk to humans or the environment in which they have been measured. Recently, this is much more recent, the European tire industry through EPR, also because of the debate that picked up regarding the significant contribution of tire and road wear particles to the aquatic environment, I would say, this microplastic debate. We also commissioned the study in 2017 to a team of consultants, Deltares, well known in Europe, but also Carno Chemrisk, who had worked for the past 15 years around this tire and road wear particles, to look into the particle distribution and retention in fresh water, also saltwater settlings. And what the study found is that because of the size and the density of these particles, about 95% tend to settle in soil and freshwater sediments. Up to between 2 and 5% of these particles may reach the estuary of the rivers. The particles do indeed settle before degradation, namely along the roadsides and to a lesser extent in freshwater sediment, which is why probably we need to continue and pursue an approach which is holistic, which is also requested in order to prevent that these particles enter into the environment. The result of these studies are available. Again, I put the links, they are available and they can be consulted by the audience. But, you know, as I said, research is not an end in itself, work continues, and the industry, either through the tire industry project under the World Business Council for Sustainable Development or regional tire associations in Europe, in USA and beyond Canada, the work continues to look at the potential impact to the long-term exposure of these particles. And I think there was a very important statement from Fraunhofer Institute regarding Dr. Bertling, the biodegradability. There is still a lot unknown what happens to these particles. How do they, in terms of degradation, how do they behave? Still, we need to understand in the environment and the long-term effect, but also the presence, their fate, and the way how they are transported in the different environmental compartments. So this investigation on the long-term exposure impacts is certainly one of the outcomes that we are all keen to see being published, hopefully in the course of next year. Well, that's on the knowledge gap, but another challenge that we need to look at is also what can we do as industry? And indeed, there has been a lot of activities going on the knowledge gaps. We also started working on the generation part. Yes, as we have seen already, there are several influencing factors for on the tire abrasion. But this doesn't stop industry, and actually industry launched already back in 2018 a specific initiative in order to develop feasibility and the test method. In the end, now the work has started for the development of a test method, because it's important to understand how we can measure in order to be able to implement also a measurable measure. The test method that we will have to have implemented, for example, in Europe in time, but will have to be also representative of the European driving conditions. It will have to be able to help also the industry continue this innovation effort in order to minimize performance trade-offs. You know that tire performances, a number of them are regulated, several of them, key ones, fuel efficiency, safety, rolling noise. We need to make sure, and these are only the regulated ones, there are 10 other more performances which are requested by the vehicle manufacturers or by the customers, which are also equally important. So all these performance trade-offs have to be make sure that we remain a product that's first function is to be safe. So the wet traction, which is considered to be the most extreme behavior, it has to perform. So when rubber hits the road, we need to make sure that the prime function of the tire is fulfilled while meeting all the other expectations and performances. And again, I want to repeat, so tire design, we are working on that, but there are so many different factors which have an impact. And I think, again, I repeat, this is also the reason why, and it has actually prompted our industry to look at that from a really holistic approach, involving a multi-stakeholder approach, because we cannot resolve and we cannot address this problem just by one measure and one stakeholder in the process. So this multi-stakeholder approach that I'm talking about, it's a platform that was launched in 2018. It is facilitated by CSR Europe. This platform, I'm showing you here the participants of the platform, and it's a growing, actually, participants. It has, of course, the institutions are there. European Parliament has also been, from the very beginning, associated, informed of this initiative. European Commission is both DG Environment, DG Grow are regular, frequent contributors to the discussions. But we have all the industries that are important and have an impact on what we are talking about. So the road industry, as well as the road authorities, the vehicle manufacturers, of course, the drivers. You have seen, and we will see later, that the driver alone is quite important in this process of tire and road wear particles generation. Euro, one of the organizers of today's event, have also been associated from the very beginning, because we needed to understand, as we said, 95% of these particles end up there, and they have the potential to be collected and treated, and they are indeed. Chemical industry, but more importantly, we have a very important science community supporting the activity, and this has only but grown, and we have now really a number of new commerce which have enriched even the platform. Then we have the civil society organizations, IUCN well-known, Plastics Foundation, and the national authorities, as well as, I'm very happy, ACR Plus has recently also shown interest and joined this, at least, exchange of opinions. I think it's quite important that we continue having this possibility of bringing together all the interested parties to have, first of all, really an open and an inclusive dialogue about this issue. It's better when we can all talk about it, when we can exchange what exists, learn from each other, for example, in terms of knowledge and science that are generated in these months. Well, the platform has a repository of studies, and there have been more than 40 different studies that have been identified just in the last 18 months. So it also demonstrates how dynamic is this process. So the platform aims to help to have a common understanding on the possible effects of these particles which are generated during a normal use and wear. So it is not extreme use and wear. No, it's a normal, when you drive your car, it's what happens. tire and road interaction is what matters. And then to look at these options of co-designing mitigation initiatives, which is so important because we need indeed to understand what can be done. And I think we can definitely do more when we are all together. In the first round of the platform, when this was 2018-2019, middle of 2019, two reports have been published, important reports. They have, and both are available to all of you. Again, the links are there. One of the report looked at the really listing those knowledge gaps. And in fact, those knowledge gaps are work has started, but even more is needed. So one of the knowledge gaps in 2019 was indeed to have a reliable and a representative tire abrasion test, which is able to measure in gram per kilometer the material loss. They have also identified the need to have a better analytical tools for tire and road wear particles. They have identified the need to improve the mass balance models. Also, the ecological effects of tire and road wear particles. All these are work that has now started, mainly driven by the tire industry. There is still work and knowledge gaps identified which remain unaddressed for the time being, like the influence of road parameters on these particle generations. Also, the degradation in the soils and the sediments, which are acting as sinks. I think we will know something, but probably there is further work that is needed there. And on the capturing systems for tire and road wear particles in runoff and sewer overflow. So there is still area for further research and information to be gathered. This was on the scientific knowledge part. Then on the way forward, what needs to be done, there were also several initiatives that have been identified as a way to mitigating the environmental impact. Well, measures to address directly the generation of these tire and road wear particles. And as I told you, I think the most important one will be indeed the test method in order to be able to see what can be done when we have a comparable test method applying for tires. Measures to address the capture and the removal of these particles. This is very important. It's an area where we need probably even more debate and discussion with all the stakeholders. And finally, of course, we need to look at the continued cross-sector collaboration. Here, I wanted to show you a number of measures which have been identified, and I think it speaks for themselves, these measures. So there are measures which are on the knowledge gaps, and as I said, several of them are being addressed, and I think they have been either completed or underway, like the test method, for example, work on the tire WP composition, the test method, this platform in order to continue exchanging information. But then there are also measures which are either constructional elements or consumer driven in terms of generation, and some measures which are more important in terms of capture of these particles, because we need to work on all of them. And here there are, I want to insist on this consumer one, the one that we have on the below. Everyone agrees that by far the most effective and simplest way of reducing tire and road wear particle production is to make sure that your tires has the right pressure, it is in right condition, and you have a slower and less aggressive driving style. Actually, if you are an eco-friendly driver, you also have a positive impact on the abrasion of your tires. So yes, there is need, and I think in one of the slides from Dr. Breitling, we saw that by just reducing the speed, you also reduce the emissions of tire and road wear particles. Also, very important area is the regional collaboration through hotspots and regional pilots. Hopefully, there are some good initiatives that are being now exchange also with, for example, EPA network. That's something that's going on. Capture of these particles. Indeed, there are some interesting proposals underway, and hopefully we can come up with some concrete initiatives to be able. And we need to continue, in fact, even intensify the understanding of the tire and road wear particles, because we talk of a different mobility with different characteristics as well of the vehicle. So that there is also need to continue the work on that one. So this platform indeed has helped to streamline a number of actions. So the work on tire abrasion rate, which is recognized to be the right indicator to address the tire and road wear particle generation and mitigation, is on its way. So the test method is being developed. This is done also in full transparency with the European institutions. When ready, and should be ready in a couple of years, it should be able to be used for regulatory purposes. We need to continue working on the knowledge gaps, and the entire industry is doing that, but more is needed, and hopefully through Horizon 2020 and or Horizon Europe initiatives, there will be further research opportunities. One of them will be definitely to understand the electrification impact. We definitely need to work, and the platform is now has identified actually the need to work on the hotspots, and we believe that with the support of ACR Plus, the EPA network, the local authorities are very active in the platform, like Hessen, Oslo, Stockholm, and some others. We hope to be able to gain also on this and initiate maybe some concrete pilot projects. Driver behavior, I told you, is an area where we need to do more. And I've seen in the chat that there was even a question, how can we do to make sure that we can educate better? I think there is not only an educating better at the end of life to bring the waste to a collection point, but also during the use phase, we can do a positive impact on that. And finally, and really this is very important, we are looking within the platform in this year's activities in 2021 at best practice exchange, but also synergies in the approach for tackling the microplastics, also with other sectors which are equally targeted, like the tire industry is, textile, paint industry, and others, to understand how this is, how they are also addressing that. Because again, I don't think that we can address by individual and in silo measures problems which is involving so many different stakeholders and participants. So this will be my final slide for as an introduction to this very important problematic. So the tire industry does recognize the need to address tire and road wear particles and sustains its action plan with a strong attention and efforts. It believes that tire industry can be and is part of the solution. But technology, research, innovation, and cooperation remain key to solving the issue of this pollution, the entire microplastics pollution. We need to continue to get a better grasp of the scientific nature of this problem. Industry, again, stresses the need for science-based action. We need to make sure that further progress of scientific knowledge and the establishment of a reliable test methods are a necessary condition for further initiatives. The fact that the issue is complex and that the many factors are at play requires an engagement of a broad multi-stakeholder approach. We will make ours, but we need also all the other parties to join in this effort. It's only through this that we can further strengthen, well, the existing partnership, but also create new ways of solving the problem altogether. The industry is engaged, as I said. We will continue this dialogue. We are very happy to be associated to this reflection. Why not? Maybe the EPR instrument, I think it's not a straightforward answer now because there are indeed some, but we are happy to have this discussion, this reflection all together. And I would like to invite also that this debate is pursued within the framework of the tire and road wear particles. The topic is complex. We are invested, but we believe also that it requires a joint effort for us to be able to address this in the most comprehensive manner. I think that was my last slide. Thank you very much for your attention, and of course, I'm happy for any questions that you think is helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I think not yet so known around the public. Now our last speaker will give us some insight about how we capture those microplastics. So Mr. Anders Finsen is a senior environmental advisor at the Swedish Waters Svenskt Vatten, working in the field of wastewater and environment. And he represents here Euro, the voice of Europe's drinking water and wastewater service operators. Mr. Finsen held several positions at Euro. He is now chairing the Euro Joint Group on Water Framework Directive. Mr. Finsen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Francoise, for this very nice introduction, and many thanks to you for organizing this workshop. And yes, that's right. I will now talk about microplastics capture and looking into what happens in the our urban waters, looking into the wastewater part of our urban waters. And as you said, I'm representing Euro today, which is the voice of Europe's water and wastewater services. And we represent 29 European countries from both public and private companies. Okay, I will mainly, I'm mainly basing my speech today onto two projects on microplastics in wastewater. Both of these projects have been performed in Sweden. And these projects, they were aimed to create an overview and increased understanding of microplastics in the wastewater management cycle in the urban waters. And we have in these projects investigated several fractions, the influent wastewater to the wastewater treatment plants, the effluent from the wastewater into the receiving water, sewage sludge, and for one of the projects also soil fertilized with sludge for 35 years. What happens then when you use this sludge for 35 years in agriculture? And also very important is that for all these fractions, method development has been included, and the microplastics have been measured as milligram per liter or milligram per kilogram of dry matters for the sludge. And so they have been measured in mass and not number of particles, which is really important, we think, because if you measure in number of particles, in the analytical method itself can split one particles into 10 or 50 other new particles. Number of particles could be a good complement, but we think that the basis should be that we measure in concentrations, mass concentrations, that we do with all other contaminants. The first project is performed in the third biggest city in Sweden, Malmö, in southern Sweden, and at the Sjölunda wastewater treatment plant. And this treatment plant takes care of wastewater from 350,000 persons. And what we see is that that more than 99% of the wastewater, of 99% of the microplastics in the range of 10 to 500 micrometers were removed from the incoming wastewater. And I think also that Jürgen also explained this from his experiences from Fraunhofer, that the microplastics can really be removed. They are removed in wastewater treatment plants. We could see in other places all around in Europe that they have still excellent removing rates, 80 to 95% removal. This is very much in connection to if you have to remove a lot of phosphorus, you have to remove a lot of particles, and if you remove a lot of particles, then you remove also the microplastics to a very high extent. What I'm also really coming back to on and on again is the we like to put the unit in grams per person and year. This is good to have, and it gives us an possibilities to have a good overview, and also think that Jürgen also did mention the mass per person and year. And what we see when we have these 99% of microplastics removal in this Malmö treatment plant, we have less than 1 gram per person year to the water, to the receiving water, so 0.15 gram per person year. And looking into what happens, so we have about 20 gram per person a year into the wastewater treatment plant, and only 0.15 out of the wastewater treatment plant to the waters. What we also can see that we have only, it's quite much anyway, but we have only 40% of the microplastics in the incoming wastewater were found in the anaerobically digested sludge, because we have several regarding grit removal. We do have the screens where the microplastics easily is caught on, and so we found 40% of the microplastics in the influent water in the digested sludge, and when we then use it on agricultural land, they have 0.40 about a gram per kilograms of dry matter, and compared to the fertilizing product regulation, it is 5 times less than what is allowed today on plastics or impurities. So per person and year, it's 8 grams microplastic per person and year to the sludge. And what happens then when we use sludge on agricultural land, and we have we are very lucky to have a long-lasting research on at 2 farms in southern Sweden, and they take care of the sludge, one of them from this Malmö treatment plant. And you can see the different bars below, on the x-axis, and on the y-axis you can see microplastics in soil, how many milligrams per kilogram of dry matter soil we do find. And you can see the green short bar without sludge is what we find in areas where the atmospheric deposition is probably one of the main inputs. We do find the next bars, you can find that what we find in the sludge amended soil, where sludge has been used in 35 years, is all about the same. But when we calculate what we probably have had in sludge all over these years, if we extrapolate that we have had the same amount of microplastic as today, the last 35 years, it is 10 times more. And the reasons behind this is that we possibly have a disintegration of the particles of below 10 micrograms, and a degradation of some of the plastics. Not all plastics can be degraded in soil, but some. And we also have 4 to 5 times higher sludge use on this land in these experiments than it's usually done in Sweden. And then you can see that we have an increase in the of microplastic regarding milligrams per kilograms dry matters in the soil. Project number 2 is project number 2 is based on mainly in Gothenburg, Göteborg, Sweden's second biggest city, and the capital Stockholm, the biggest city. And what we could see at where we have taken samples from areas where we have no stormwater, but only wastewater from households, no industries, we could see that we have a variation between 3 to 10 grams of microplastic per person and year in the influent. And we can also see in the Gothenburg RIA wastewater treatment plant, it has got around 800,000 persons connected. We we could see that 30% of the microplastic originates from this domestic wastewater, and we have another 70% from stormwater and other sources when we are looking into what the total influent to the wastewater treatment plant. We could also see that the load of tire particles into the wastewater treatment plants is only about 1 gram per person a year. On the other hand, this the analytical methods, they are really under development for these parts because it has been much more difficult to analyze these black particles than other polymers. What this study also shows is that microplastics are also at this in Gothenburg. They are removed also by approximately 99%. The Gothenburg plant has also high demands of phosphorus removal. And we could see that, and that is also important to say, that Gothenburg is maybe one of the cities with the most stormwater to the wastewater treatment plant. The tradition in Sweden is to have duplicated systems. So you have wastewater from households in one part, and you have stormwater from the urban runoff in another sewer pipe. And but in Gothenburg, a part of the stormwater goes into the wastewater. I think it's about 30% of the stormwater. But we could see today is that the microplastic load direct from stormwater to the receiving waters are 100 times greater than of the which comes in the effluent from the wastewater treatment plant. That is because we have 99% removal in the treatment plant, but we have hardly no removal at all from the stormwaters. So in the influence they are equal, but it will end up with having 100 times more in the wastewater treatment effluent. So there's really a large number of pathways to the environment, and especially for stormwater, it requires many control at source measures. So my last slide and conclusion and repetition is that that wastewater treatment plants are highly effective in retaining microplastics with 80 to 99% removal, very much depending on the requirements of phosphorus removal. Microplastic pathways to water recipients from stormwater is 100 times greater than from effluent wastewater in the Gothenburg region. And in looking into sludge, we have 40, and in Gothenburg 60% of the microplastic in the incoming wastewater were found in the digested sludge. And there can be processes of both removing and some disintegration, and maybe even for some plastic degradation during the treatment in an ordinary wastewater treatment plant. Mostly it's probably to be removed in grit removal and the screenings. The concentrations of microplastics in sludge, it's in between 5 to 8 grams per person a year. And sludge, a normal dose, Swedish dose, used as a fertilizer during 35 years, seems not to cause an elevated microplastic concentration in soil. And our explanation is that the microplastics might be disintegrated into smaller particles than 10 micrograms, which is our what we have been able to analyze, or being degraded, or both. And regarding source control and EPR, additional removal requirements at the wastewater treatment plants we don't think are sustainable, because they are having already a very good removal rate possibilities, but more source control is needed for microplastics in stormwater. And regarding stormwater, there's also a need for polluters pay and extended producers responsibility. And in other European countries, all or most of the stormwater is going into the wastewater treatment plants, and there, in these cases, we also have to discuss the source control and EPR. I have added the references to the two reports. They are the bad news is that they are in Swedish. The good news is that they have summaries in English and they are easily to be Google translated, and you're most welcome to be in contact with me regarding questions. And from Euro, we have also put together an overview briefing note on wastewater and microplastics, where you can find much more information from all over the EU. So many thanks for giving me the floor and the chance to do this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that like that we can start having some discussion with all the background information that we receive right now. So maybe before starting with all the questions that we already received, I would like to ask the panelists to maybe tell us what for them is or are the most efficient policy instrument in order to address microplastic pollution. And I will start with Mr. Bertling, and afterwards Mrs. Sinneralp, and ending by Mr. Finson. So, Mr. Bertling, could you tell us what are the policy instruments needed, according to you, in order to tackle this microplastic issue?
Yeah, thank you a lot. I'm not a specialist in policy instruments. I'm more or less a scientist, but I think what we read in the last presentation, every measure which tries to control at the source is very important, because wastewater treatment plants are not intended to be a solid waste water treatment plant. It are wastewater treatment plants, and I think I fully agree with Anders. They do a really good job. I think we have to have a look on the stormwaters. This is very important, because a lot of stormwaters never see a wastewater treatment plant. I think there is perhaps space for improvement, and I see every measures in direction eco-design as very important. And I really believe that we can improve tires, that we can improve shoe soles, that we can improve textiles, and so on. So I really think this is the best way to tackle the problem, perhaps with a ban of a few sources which are not so important for the products they are used in, like it is intended with a ECHA restriction proposal. But yeah, eco-design for me is the most important thing.
Thank you very much. What about you, Mrs. Sinneralp?
Sorry, I was mute. Thank you, Mrs. Bonnet. I think the question is definitely not an easy one. The complex nature of tire and road wear particle generation definitely calls for a holistic approach in order to look and consider the multiplicity of these various factors which are influencing. So design of tire, yes, we agree, but how about design of road surfaces, driving behavior, the maintenance of the vehicles, the maintenance of the road pavements? So action on tire and road wear particle mitigation will have to be embedded in a larger policy framework. A combination of several policy instruments will be needed. Regulatory measures, yes, probably. I think this is becoming more and more clear on maybe tire and why not road design. But also we need economic instruments in order to influence, for example, the individual behavior, but also the information systems, which all take into account this full ecosystem of the roads, the vehicles, and the user's behavior. I heard Mr. Breitling saying we can improve tires. I think the tire industry is known to innovate, and it has innovated, and it will continue to innovate. Yes, you're right. But maybe before being able to know what are we comparing to, we need to have also some measurable instruments. That's why I said it's so important to have a robust and the reliable test method to be able to also make sure that we are not making the wrong investments, and make sure that the tires also in the future, together with these new, maybe additional requirements on abrasion, continues to fulfill its first and by far the most important function, which is to help the vehicle grip on the road. That's what is expected from the tire. On top of being, as I said, environmentally friendly, sustainable, etc. But I think the first function, being the grip, has to be maintained in all conditions. So yes, there is no one measure, but probably a mix of several measures.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Finston, what is your opinion about the needed more efficient instruments?
Thank you very much, Françoise, for giving me the floor again. I'm really much in line with the two previous speakers. That source control is the source control. I see that that's the main track, and this track can contain a lot of different measures, everything from better design of tires and of also the road material and road painting, but also all the way, which we at the wastewater treatment plants do see far too often in the EU, that we have wet wipes flushed into the toilet system, and many of them contains polymers which are not more than plastics, and then they are torn in parts. And in that way, in these cases, we are really into that we need EPR for having information, having these intentionally flushed objects to be reduced into our systems. So yes, source control is that's the main family, I think, and EPR can be a really good help to incentivize the source control solutions for some of the inputs. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for your input, and I think that we will have the occasion to go more in depth regarding the EPR instrument. I mean, the principle, so the extended producer responsibility as such, and also maybe to discuss about EPR scheme applied to this problematic. But I think it will be more for the second event that will be held on February. Now we received a lot of questions, so I think it's time to maybe ask you the different questions we received. I will try to do my best to maybe summarize or to address the question to the right speakers, hopefully. So maybe I will start with Mrs. Rosalina Petrova, if she's still with us, I don't know. So one question is, does the Commission and the Member States intend to do something on education? Having legislation in place is one thing, but if people continue to throw away garbage instead of sorting for recycling, it will be difficult to reach the objective. So is education or budget for education foreseen? And can textile producers pay for the installation of filters in washing machine to capture microfibers before they enter wastewater stream. And third one, afterwards, I will stop here for Mrs. Petrova. In your opening remarks, you mentioned that the upcoming microplastic regulation will take into account textiles and tires, as indicated by Commission already. The Commission is currently looking for feedback on food contact materials. How will food contact materials be impacted by this subject? So I don't know if Mrs. Petrova is still with us and if she can maybe give some answer to those questions.
Sure. Thank you very much. And I would also like to thank all the presenters for their super interesting presentations that went really in depth and provided a lot of knowledge on various topics. This is exactly the kind of information that we need also for both for the implementation of our policies and also for the future policy formulation. And I'm sure that this kind of inputs will also be able to be given in the coming months when we will look in depth both in our initiatives on unintentional release of microplastics and also on the revision of the wastewater treatment directive. So thanks a lot about that. Indeed, one major takeaway is indeed the need for measures that address the source of microplastic pollution, because let's face it, extended producer responsibility schemes are important to fund or to finance. I mean that basically to take the producer responsibility to finance solutions to environmental issues, and it's very important to have these solutions. So for instance, in the area of proper waste management, we know what these solutions are, which is proper separate waste collection, then recycling, the proper treatment, sorting, and then recycling, and also awareness raising. And here is where we come to education and awareness raising, where it's indeed, for instance, in the single-use plastic directive, those awareness raising, and then also in the general EPR requirements, awareness raising is a key element of this kind of solutions that we can offer for addressing waste problems. But of course, just awareness raising is not enough. I mean, to be honest, I don't like approaches that blame it all on the consumers or on the citizens. Basically, one of the citizens have to participate in the collection systems, but it's very important that those collection systems are properly designed so that it's convenient and logical for the people to participate in those systems, because no matter how well people are educated, if they don't find the system that or opportunities to deal with their waste in a way that is convenient to them, that this also would not happen. So it's very important to have both proper organization of the waste management, which is a responsibility for the authorities and for the extended producer responsibility schemes, combined with awareness raising. So that's a point that is extremely important. Well, as regards there were questions on the guidance on the extended producer responsibility, and this is something that we are going to we are working quite intensively on, and we are going to publish soon. Sorry, what was the second question? Because it was just I had to change place in our teleworking, and I didn't have my pen. Sorry.
No, I'm looking after this. Yeah, regarding the food contact materials, or the one before?
Well, I can address the food contact materials. So basically, let's say the challenges that are addressed by the food contact material legislations are a bit different than the ones that we are talking about here. Basically, there is very strict regulation on food contact materials. Of course, a lot of those materials also constitute, of course, packaging, and this is where we are going to review the packaging and packaging waste directive in order to ensure that all packaging is reusable, recyclable in an economically viable way. And then another element is, of course, the application of the single-use plastic directive, which again will impact it. It has requirements that concerns packets, wrappers, food containers. So again, this is one of the pieces of legislation which will be important for the food contact. Yeah, and then the second question that was
on textile, I think. Can textile producers pay for the installation of filters in washing machine to capture
the washing
before they enter the wastewater?
Thank you for that. Indeed, of course, we in our impact assessment on the measures to take on to indeed prevent the leakage of microplastics in the environment, we will look at the various options. But when we are talking about, for instance, filters on washing machines, we also have to consider the very practical question of so what happens with the microplastics that is captured by this filter. And for instance, if the microplastics that is captured by the filter is washed, then of course this will be a futile measure, because it will anyway come in the wastewater, and then will be treated and then go into the sludge. Then if those filters, let's say, are removed and disposed of in the residual waste, then of course we will create another waste problem. So perhaps we have to consider always also those practical considerations. But as I said, it's still to be, the impact assessment is still to be carried out.
Thank you very much.
Sorry for that. I mean, that for missing my pen, but it's indeed a lot of interesting questions in the chat as well, and it's not always evident what to focus on. So thanks a lot. Yeah.
Maybe before going to Mrs. Sinerad, there is a general question about is there any study on plastic pollution deriving from shoes? Because we have tires, but our shoes with rubber soles. Are you aware, one of you, about a study on plastic pollution deriving from shoes? I do not have any idea about that, but maybe someone.
Perhaps I could start. I do not know if there is any study dealing with this topic in detail, but I know that there are a few companies working on this topic. They try to make shoe soles from natural rubber. But to be honest, when natural rubber is used, it is cross-linked. And when it is cross-linked, it's not a natural polymer anymore. It's an at least semi-synthetic polymer. And I think what we need, therefore, is tests on biodegradability. And biodegradability was also mentioned in the presentation of Mrs. Sinerad.
Yes.
But the tests which were mentioned by Professor Jekyll in his study are from 1980, from Williams and Cadle. And I think we really urgently need some more studies on biodegradation on tires and other rubbers and on all polymers. That is really missing.
Thank you very much. Maybe I will address two questions to Mrs. Sineralp. So the first one, how could improved sewage treatment plants help reducing the leakage to the environment? Do you think self-driving cars be better than human assisted driving? And we agree there are unknowns, but fact is that society wish to reduce emission drastically. Is the tire industry ready to pay for mitigation measures, roadside cleaning, urban wastewater treatment, or street cleaning, etc.? And I think last one, is there any difference in the rate of release of particles from new tires compared with older tires? Does a partially worn tire release fewer particles per kilometer compared with a new tire? Well, question to you, Mrs. Syneralp, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, colleagues. You have really generated a good debate. So lots of very good discussions and elements. Now, maybe to take one by one, I don't know how much I can help, but I can at least give a perspective from our window. First of all, to the question about sewage treatment plants. Honestly speaking, the data that have been shared either by Euro or shared in different fora, like for example OECD, suggests that wastewater treatment plant effluents and sludge do not represent a significant pathway of these particles to the environment. So I don't know if indeed there is a way of improving further, but we understand that up to 98 to 99% of the particles are indeed clean through the treatment operations, and that's also what I can see in the report of the OECD. So that's for it, but the specialists are definitely in your area. Regarding the electric, whether an electric or automated or electric cars, self-driving cars will be better than human-assisted cars, I think it's a very interesting question, and I want to thank the gentleman for this question. I don't know, but for sure, in all instances, the tire condition has to be right. We can assume that self-driving cars will have more controlled braking, driving, a much less aggressive driving behavior, but all still depends on the condition of the tire, whether the pressure is right, whether the condition of the tire is still good. And on top of that, whether the tire is right for the right conditions of driving. As I said, the weather conditions has a significant impact. When you drive a summer tire in winter conditions or driving winter tires in summer conditions, you do not abrade the same manner. So it has influences. So I think even in the case of self-driving cars requires proper maintenance conditions. And then also there is, of course, the road pavement, which is quite important to be taken into account. Then the question from Oliver, whether or not industry would be ready to start talking about the EPR. I think, honestly speaking, the generation of tire and road wear particles now is clear that it's influenced by many factors. Some of them are directly under the control of the tire manufacturers, but many of them are not under the control of the tire manufacturers. Like, as I said, the vehicle weight, the pressure, the driving conduct, the road surface, the conditions of driving. So we believe that public authorities in charge of road building and maintenance may also have a role to play in minimizing the generation of these particles. A lifetime EPR scheme, well, should ideally define responsibilities, but it's clear that it's not a straightforward. I remember the report that was conducted for Euro by Deloitte also recognized that the task is not an easy one. The diffuse nature and multiple pathways of tire microplastics emissions will make it difficult to clearly designate a producer. So I think as tire industry, what I would like to say, and I think I said that also during my presentation, ETRMA would like to invite for a broader reflection, discussion on the overall, indeed, responsibilities and the limited influence of tire manufacturers on the release of these particles during the lifetime of the tires. But still, we want to have this discussion all together. So yes, we are ready to start, and maybe this is the starting of a reflection. So thanks to EPR Club, to the intergroup. But hopefully we can continue this debate maybe in a more organized manner also, but also deeper. Why not in the platform future sessions, one of the future sessions. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe now those two questions are more for Mr. Bogovič. Mitigation measures should be decided based on the Green Deal, impact on GHG emissions, energy use, people health, zero pollution, etc. What do you think about it? And another question, how does and how could the industry take more responsibility? So it's a little bit the same question as already mentioned, addressed to the tires industry. But so, what is your opinion, Mr. Bogovič? The floor is yours.
Thanks. As we see in this debate, and here were mentioned quite big knowledge gap. And I think, first of all, before politicians decide, it's necessary to get more knowledge. And I think that such events are very important. And if we speak, I don't know, there was a 3 kilogram of microplastic, to find sources, to prepare action, and go in right direction. We saw, for example, in the tire industry, the influence of tire design against driving style is 1 against 3. And if you put together topology of the road surface and driving style, it's 13 against 2. And now it will be necessary on the basis of such a knowledge to target the right things and find in this holistic approach who is responsible. And for sure, I am sure that industry, we must help industry in development. Horizon projects are excellent for this, but there are limits at the end of the day. And if we will just push on one side, and at the end we will be unhappy that there are not good results, perhaps we will not start on the right side. And so I think this is the very important that we have, and thanks to science, that we got right information, and then to go in the right direction. Here Rosalina mentioned waste treatment. I was mayor 13 years in Slovenia. We work a lot on waste treatment, but we saw in many cases that there we prepared everything, but at the end the separate collection. But I know in some cases this waste at the end comes together, and at the end it's no sense. And if we will not be enough fair, enough transparent, and have a clear vision how to do it, won't be easy. And so I think this is the right way we go in this direction. The next, what it was also mentioned about education. It's very important. We recognized in last year, and these are also my experiences from Slovenia. We started at the beginning of this century. I was mayor between 1998 and 2011, and we started with eco clubs in primary schools. And this was the best teacher. These pupils were teacher at home. And with their perception, with their responsibility to nature, to environment, we do think better. And for example, in Slovenia, we have very good result in separate collection and in all this stage of this. So I hope that I answered. I think it's a holistic approach, not to be focused on one small piece and forgot for big picture. And at the end of the day, we will be successful in whole story if we will go like we did with these webinars. I think it's great that first we speak with science, with industry about basic things, about good practices, good cases, and then we speak about legislation. And this is the right way to be successful at the end of the day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bogovič. Maybe now some questions from Mr. Finson, because when we speak about microplastic, we speak about wastewater management, and of course we speak about infrastructure. So in your view, do the age of the plants and or treatment technology used at the wastewater treatment plant impact the rate of removal from microplastic? Another one, is the water sector considering taking action against the increasing pollution by plastic biomedia used in wastewater treatment plants, is the Commission planning, this is for Mr. Pedrova, is the Commission planning to include this issue in its much needed ambition to address microplastic pollution? So Mr. Finson first.
So thank you very much for these questions. And the first question, if does the age have an impact of the possibility for the wastewater treatment plant to remove microplastics? It can have, but it doesn't have to have an impact if you have a good wastewater treatment plant and have been able to have a good maintenance. These wastewater treatment plants can be running for decades, and of course you have to upgrade the plant if you have an increased population. But a plant from the 70s with a good maintenance and could still be good for removing microplastics if you have requirements of also removing phosphorus. So at least from 80%, maybe even up to 99%, depending on the requirements, you have to remove phosphorus, which is it's a nutrient causing eutrophication in our lakes, rivers, and seas. And the Francois, was the last question about what is the water sector planning for reducing microplastics to the environment? Was that did I catch the question the right way? Yes, what we are planning is now that we have research ongoing in many different European countries, where we try to see what kind of removal rate do we have today in wastewater treatment plants, what happens when the microplastic is removed, how much do we have in the sludge, what do we have to have, what kind of help do we have to be able to be progressive in the circular economy, and being able to reuse treated wastewater in agricultural land and to reuse nutrients and organic matter on agricultural land without increasing the microplastic in the soils. These questions are really important for us, and it's also important for us to learn to know how much, how can we even be better on removing microplastics. And what we see now, and maybe you also could see a glimpse of that in my presentation, that what should we do with the stormwater in cities where we have duplicated systems all the way. How could this water be treated, and how could we, what kind of coordination or cooperations should we have with other actors to be able to finance this? Because as you could see in the Gothenburg regional area, it was 100 times more in the stormwater to the receiving waters than from this huge wastewater treatment plant of 800,000 persons. So, but it's always, I really, I'm echoing Mr. Bogovič there of we have to collect. We are now in the phase of collecting knowledge and looking into what we can have for what kind of results for in practice, and we do we know much more now than only 5 to 10 years ago, and in the next phase we have to see how these solutions can for stormwater can be technically constructed and designed and financed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I still have two questions addressed to Mrs. Petrova regarding the restriction of internationally added microplastics. What lies behind the choice of applications in the scope of restriction, especially if they are not the main source of accumulation in nature, for example, crop protection minus 0.5%. And another one, what timeline does the Commission envisage for action on an unintentional relief of microplastics? Are there other sectors covered beyond textile and tires? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that, and also to Mr. Finson, who I think replied to a lot of questions that indeed were also directed to the Commission as well. So as regards the Commission action, and we saw today how complex the area of microplastic and addressing microplastic pollution is, and you know, we don't believe in silver bullets, so we don't believe that there will be one action or let's say one area with which we will solve the problem. As I said, we act on waste, on proper waste treatment, and we still see that intentionally added microplastics, it may not be the biggest source, but it's part of the puzzle, and it's an important part of the puzzle, because our proposal, this possible restriction would actually prevent 500,000 tons of microplastics releases into our environment over 20 years. So this is not an insignificant amount, and it also gives a very important signal for the design of products, that they should be designed without microplastics. And this is also important for the future, because we see that actually there is a lot of pressure to increase the use of plastics, be it from industry. It's also because of the functionalities of the material. So that's why it's very important to both deal with the current pollution and to give this important signal for the future. And in this regard, this proposal is quite important. But then, of course, we don't say, well, we deal with intentionally added microplastics and then that's it. No, that's why we have those actions also on unintentional release of microplastics. And here is where we indeed have started the process on the main sources of pollution, are indeed the ones that were mentioned, textiles, where, for instance, there are various measures. You could have, for instance, industrial washing, so already before they reach consumers, and then, of course, one of the main elements that we will be working also on as part of our new circular economy action plan is actually the design of products, and this is also where all aspects of sustainable design will be taken into account. So this agenda of making sustainable products the norm is also very important in this regard. And of course, we will also address pollution by plastic pellets, because this is another area where action can make a difference. Because it's also important, I mean, not only first of all, of course, identifying where action is really can be impactful because of the scale of the problem, and then where action can really be taken so that we can make a difference. And pellets is one of those areas as well. So I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. And I think that we had a lot of information in less than 2 hours, and maybe I will try to sum up, or to at least give key words about what has been said. And I think that one important point is that this holistic approach for all microplastics, that we need to understand what are the solution and the role of each stakeholders of the chain. Of course, it's a question of funding solution, and do we already have solutions? We still have maybe to know more about the issue. For sure, eco-design and public awareness are really important. So I think that we have enough information to be ready to receive more information during the next event that will be held on the 24th of February, again on the same topics, but we will try to go more in details, and especially I think that we will link a little bit the event with the new European strategy on textile, because it's one of the important sector where we produce microplastics. So I think that we can end here, and I would like to thank you, the co-organizer, and especially Euro, who was always supporting this organization together with EBCD. And maybe I give the floor to EBCD to close the event.
Thank you very much, Françoise. Before that, I would just like to provide the floor to Mr. Bogovič for his closing remarks as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ilias, and thanks first of all to all panelists for a great presentation, for great discussion. Thanks to all audience, around 200 people were interested today to speak about this issue about microplastic. As Françoise said, this is here we need holistic approach, cross-sector collaboration, as we said, and our Slovenian commissioner, Mr. Potočnik, started to speak a lot about circular economy. He raised this issue, I think, on high level, and now we know that our main philosophy, our vision of overdevelopment is under, I say sometimes magic words, Green Deal, and inside this we have a lot of legislation. Legislation started very interesting about waste management, and as we heard today, there is in preparation a lot of other legislation. So I'm sure that this is the right way. Thanks for your participation. Thanks that I could host this event, and I think that it's a good base for the good debate on 24th of February. Thank you, and Ilias, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bogovič, for your remarks. Well, on behalf of the European Parliament Intergroup, I would also like to wholeheartedly thank all of our speakers and participants. Thank you once again, Mr. Bogovič, for taking the lead. I think that following such an interesting discussion between panelists and our audience, following also the key interventions of all the speakers, and taking into consideration, honestly, reaching such record-breaking levels of participation with regards to this event, I think everyone is very much looking forward to the event to follow on the 24th of February. So ourselves as well, on behalf of the Secretariat of the Intergroup, very much looking forward to that. So until then, stay safe and all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you to you all.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Many thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye on my side as well.
Bye-bye.